This is episode 107 of the After Gambling Podcast. And in this episode, I have some pretty terrible news for you. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the After Gambling Podcast. You know me, my name is Jamie. I do this little podcast to talk about human behavior and through the lens of gambling addiction and looking back at my past. But again, these are just human behavior things. And that's a great segue in for today's topic. And as I said in the intro, I have terrible, terrible news for you. And it is that, yes, you probably are an addict. Whether you're a family member or a friend or a therapist or actually a gambler that's looking to try and quit or stay quit from gambling, the reality is you're a human. And my kind of observational assessment of humans over the last 15 years is that we're all addicts. It just is a matter of what we're addicted to. And I think so many times in the marketing realm, I talk about reframing issues, and that's something I'm going to try and do today because I think it's important. Sometimes just changing the lens that we see something through, looking at it from a different angle, doing a 180, going to another side and seeing it from a different angle, or telling ourselves a different story or a slightly different story completely changes human behavior. We've seen it one time after another, and it's so much of marketing is just figuring out the right way to tell the story that really resonates with the audience and gets them to act. In many cases, it's buying a product or signing up for something. And in this case, it's really looking at our own behavior and evaluating in a way that allows us to then move forward in a way that's most healthy and beneficial to our lives. And so I'll start off there and say, addiction, the word addiction, right? Like whenever we hear that, we always probably think of sin products. We think of being addicted to alcohol or drugs or gambling or sex or whatever it is. And we see these things, and they're usually behaviors that for whatever reason we look at societally, and I think we know what the reasons are. Societally, when you do too much of these things or you act out in ways that are not healthy for you or those around you, then it creates problems, right? And we start to harm others via our behavior. And so we see these sin products, smoking. Oh, I miss smoking. Gosh. And I'm not editing these too much, so we're just going to add smoking in here at the end. Another sin product. You can do all sorts of tobacco products. You get the point. And so when we start to use something, and all of a sudden it just becomes kind of part of our daily life, and in a lot of ways becomes more and more difficult. Oh, coffee. There's another one. They're going to keep popping up probably throughout this. All of us coffee drinkers, I mean, if you take a couple of days off of coffee, your body's going to react. We are addicted to coffee in a way. And so you have these things, and most of the time, and that's an interesting segue, is because we look at sin products. We don't look at alcohol and coffee addiction in the same way. One, we look at extremely detrimental, extremely risky, and it makes sense. Don't crash your car when you're on coffee versus being on alcohol. It has different effects on us and different effects on those around us. But the reality is that addiction is addiction. And it's something that, okay, if you are doing something and you can't stop, then it sounds like it's an addiction. And ultimately, it's just kind of this underlying human behavior, I think, and this human drive that, again, goes beyond what I would call kind of the sin products into other areas of our life. When I know I've talked about this before, but I was taking a survey once many years ago, and they started getting into work habits. And they didn't even ask like two questions. I'm like, oh, great. Here we go. I'm going to test positive for work. I'm going to test positive for working too much and having an addiction to work. And it was at that moment that was kind of like an eye-opening moment where I saw that, okay, addiction is not only the things that we see and that society will kind of look down upon, but in many other ways, it's things that we get put on a pedestal and we get lifted up for being great at working too much, right? Like, I mean, you see people that get awards for working too much. And you get extra money, more money for working too much. There's benefits to that. But obviously there's also downsides. And that's where I think just understanding human behavior has been an interesting thing that's really kind of helped me to sort through this stuff or just kind of evaluate. And as I look at and just kind of looking back on what is it about humans that has this inner drive, it seems like we're just endlessly searching for more. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to describe it. And I know Rogan always talks about humans. We just are kind of designed to like make better stuff. And it's like this endless pursuit of making better stuff and doing more. And that's where I think when you look at it through that lens of just, we try and do more and more and more, it becomes addiction. So it's an interesting framework and just kind of an interesting observation that I've had, that when you start to strip back things and see successful athletes, whether it's LeBron or Wayne Gretzky or Tiger Woods, and when you see, okay, is that addiction? In a lot of ways, like what drove them? They have this inner drive, right? And it's this inner human drive, and that it's to succeed. But it's also rooted in insecurity, I imagine. I'm pretty sure most of them are. Because I think most every human behavior I've ever observed, you can kind of trace it back and tell a story about insecurity and some kind of insecurity along the way that pushed them beyond what most of us go to. And you look in the business world, Steve Jobs clearly was working and had great successes, but also had tremendous downsides to his work. His family relationships were not good. Jeff Bezos is another one. I mean, he's on his new wife. So that first marriage didn't work out. And I'm sure when he signed up for that first marriage, when they got married, he wanted it to be forever. But then I imagine, I don't know anything about Jeff, so I could be completely wrong on this. I apologize, Jeff. I'm just making some assumptions from afar. And you see all sorts of athletes that go through divorce and people that are very successful. It puts a strain on these other areas. And so if we look at addiction of, okay, something that we do that's detrimental to other parts of our life or those around us, you got to classify a lot of these things in that same thing. Great artist. I could go down the list, and I won't go too deep into this, but my just kind of big picture human behavior is that, yes, we are these people, these things, this creature that for whatever reason just keeps making new and better stuff. And we have this pursuit and this endless drive, this endless thirst to improve and get better. And so I think it's important to understand that that is deep in our nature. And then how that gets expressed, I think, and how we express this addiction, this drive, is ultimately, I think, the thing that we have to be focused on and just mindful of. And I don't think we ever get it perfect. Certain that we never get it perfect. And the goal is to just kind of continue to go through and try and pull it back to center, stay between the buoys. And obviously with gambling, we got way beyond the buoys. So it was just better to say, okay, don't need to play this game. And so many things in life, I think, become that, where all of a sudden you get to the point and it's like, okay, I don't need to play this game. I'm there with alcohol. It's just, there's nothing. We went to a Cavs basketball game last night and didn't have any beer, which is kind of rare, although less and less rare for me going to sporting events these days. And there's just nothing that I missed. There was not a story that, okay, hey, I'm at a game, I have to have a beer. Like, it didn't. It's not that I think anything bad. I don't have a drinking problem. I've never been concerned about that. But it's just something that all of a sudden I realized, okay, this does not contribute to my life in this moment, in this way. And now that I'm getting older, I see the impact it has on my sleep from looking at my Whoop band. I'm like, nah, that's easy to cut out. There's no upside to it. And so where am I going with this? I don't know. I think it's important to understand that we have this innate human behavior. And I think the reason why it's important, I'll kind of get the point here, is so many times I've talked about this early on. I wanted to kind of remove this part of me. We want to remove these negative parts of our humanity that lead us to these addictions of whatever they are. And we want to try and get all of the good things without the bad. We want to get all this striving and improving or numbing without the negative side of things. And ultimately, I think that's just when you realize that this is part of human behavior and just part of being a human, is that we're always going to have this endless strive for wanting more. And then we have our minds and just have to kind of kick in and say, okay, what is enough? And to have a better and better understanding. And I think especially in modern day society, we're lucky. We don't have the need to have to drive to go out and do nearly as much as we had to in the past. And I think that's something a lot of people are actually struggling with, is that we get to where we just have more free time and we're not really sure. And we're trying to come up with purpose and meaning and all of that. And meanwhile, we do have this kind of innate genetic predisposition to more. And I highlight that because I don't know. I see so much research that highlights, okay, certain genetics predispose somebody. And I don't know. It just, again, going back to, I've yet to meet somebody that isn't driven, addicted, and has these same traits. It really just becomes, do people keep it between the buoys? Are they aware of things? And do they best balance off the pros and cons, the trade-offs that come with pursuing that action of whatever it is? And I think some of us do better than others. And I think it's this endless learning cycle where we're kind of going around the circle one time after another, and we're just faced with the similar experiences. And then we try to apply the learnings that we had in the past to try and get better and better results, get more of that good and reduce the bad. But ultimately, I guess where I'm going with this is I don't like the fact that people hear addiction and instantly start to think of all the negative things and see it as a curse, when in so many ways, it's also what is just essentially the superpower, the unbelievable superpower of being a human, is having this inner drive, having this want, this need to improve and get better. And ultimately, like the gambling, that was something we saw as a way to try to short track our way, to kind of take a shortcut to get to a better place, to where we could provide more for ourselves, more for our families, more for those around us. It was almost always everybody I've met. Very rarely was it for selfish reasons. There were the watches and all those things, but it was more the things that, like, that achievement and what it meant to society, to the families, that really is what drove a lot of gamblers. And so I just feel weird saying, okay, let's try and remove this part of us, rather than, okay, we have this superpower. If you're listening to this, you have some kind of superpower. If you're a human, you have this human superpower of wanting, driving, needing more. How do we become aware of it and continue to go with it, extracting as much of the good stuff as we can along the way? So when we get to the end, we're like, you know what? I did a really good job of getting as much of that special humanness out of me, that special superpower, while kind of keeping the negative aspects of it to a minimum. And I guess I just feel like if we can alter that story and how we see this human behavior, one, it helps us to realize that we're not really much different than anybody else. And I think that's something that creates this isolation. And again, it feels this need of like removing something. And I think that's why actually people jump from one addiction to another so much, is because it's just this trying to remove this part of them that is never going to get removed. It's really kind of attacking it the wrong way. You're not trying to remove something. You're trying to put up guardrails to avoid getting beyond, knowing that, yes, the default mode is to go too much. That is where we're going to go. So creating these systems, accountability, friends, all those types of things that I talked about in the last episode, to help keep us in the sweet spot of human. And I think there's a superpower of being human. I think we all have it within us. I think it can go very south. It can go very much to the negative. If we're not mindful of that, if we're getting too many of the cons and we're not getting any of the pros out of human behavior, it can go sideways. And that's what happened for us. And I think it happens for everybody at some point in their lives. So I don't know. Hopefully this one makes sense. It does in my head. But really, it's just that marketer's point of view of we can evaluate anything to be we can make it be whatever we think it is. And that is one of the crazy parts about being human with this big brain that we can think, is that we can completely change our view and our perspective on the same set of details in a lot of ways. So I hope that you listen to this. I hope that you see all those things that drive you nuts and those things you want to remove. Just say, okay, how do I put up boundaries to get as many of the good things and then push off the negatives? And then realize that, like, okay, this is a superpower. There's something there. If you're not getting the right result, it's because maybe we're not harnessing that superpower in the right way. We're not applying it to the right things. But applied to the right things, there's so many great achievements that we can make that really match with our values, our wants, our desires, our needs as humans, and to support our families, our communities, our friends, and all those types of things. So bundle this up, take that addiction that you have and because you have a pulse, you are an addict, use it as a superpower and channel it into all of the positive ways and think of, okay, what can I do to change my life and the life around me? And what's the best way to channel all of this extra thoughts and energy and drive? And so use those insecurities, use those kind of emotional things that drive us to act out. Use it for good. So make it your superpower. And I want to segue into I talked a little bit about the plan from last week. And this is why I like doing the podcast. Mark reached out and he's like, hey, are you actually on Reddit reading all that type of stuff? And it was like midweek. And I was like, no, actually this week I was crazy and I didn't make it to do those things. All those things I wanted to, I intended to, right? I just didn't get that habit in this week. But the nice thing about having this system where every Friday I do this podcast and kind of create some accountability, this gives me a new opportunity to come and say, okay, hey, last week didn't go well, but I'll balance it out and say, and this is kind of, I don't know, whatever. I had to get a lot of work done. And I'm looking at a wall of projects that have gotten moved way further down the line, and I'm feeling much better about those. And so just had to spend my time and attention on work stuff. Probably would have been the best thing to do my first 21 days. And I actually might just switch and do 21 days of work because that's the most important stuff to kind of clear out. I've created a little bit of a logjam with some new accounts coming in and just a lot of stuff. It's just always a busy time. So yeah, there we go. Me, the workaholic, justifying the work. Is that how this works? No, it's definitely something I got to get cleared out. And so that's been my focus, but still want to get onto the Reddit for working out and dieting and all those types of things, because that is really good for me. So I'm going to try and get back on those. And again, so if you had a week where you did really well, congrats. That's awesome. If you had a couple days, great. Congrats. If you haven't started, you didn't get into it, hey, this is a checkpoint. You're listening to this, go out, find it, see what you can add in this week. We don't need to have these perfect plans. It doesn't have to be 100% perfection. Just have to keep chipping away. A little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. So I'm going to finish up this podcast and then I'm going to hop on Reddit, read a little bit of stuff for 10 or 15 minutes, and then get back into my work. So remember, I am not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a professional basketball player. I'm not a professional golfer either. That one was really disappointing for a time. Not really that disappointing. No, I'm no professional anything. Just a guy that shares this stuff for informational purposes. So please go get professional help. Talk to somebody that can help you out and work through your stuff, especially on the finance stuff. It's coming up to tax season. Get some tax people around you that can help you. Get some finance people that can help sort out anything if you need it. No need to feel ashamed of that. And finally, music for the show is Something Elated by Broke for Free and is licensed under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening. My name is Jamie, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.